Welcome. I am Tanya Lamo, the Extension Director and Horticulture Agent for Dare County Cooperative Extension. Thank you for joining us today. Through this series, Advice to Grow By, each month we'll dig into the many facets of the wild and wonderful world of horticulture. So whether you're a novice plant collector or if your thumb is already bright green, join us as we share information and resources to expand your skills and knowledge. From understanding plant basics, growing and gardening tips, to knowing what plants work best in your landscape, every month we'll water your plant and garden knowledge. North Carolina Cooperative Extension extends research-based knowledge to all North Carolinians, helping them transform science into everyday solutions that improve their lives and grow our state. So today's topic is about fire ants. The red imported fire ant, Solenopsis invicta, continues to spread across North Carolina, in part because of the favorable climate conditions that aid its natural spread, as well as increased residential and industrial development across the state, which provides opportunities for fire ant colonies to be moved around in the state through infested soil, sod, nursery stock, and other materials. So today we're going to review how to identify fire ants and get into some nitty-gritty details about identifying insects. And then we'll discuss where they live and what they're attracted to. And then we're going to cover methods for controlling them and managing fire ants in your landscape. And I'm going to share with you some cultural and chemical practices. So the fire ant workers are approximately 1/4 inch long, and they're reddish brown with a shiny dark abdomen. So you can see in this picture the abdomen or the end of the ant is darker than the rest of the body. Fire ants there are only ants that have 2 bumps in between the thorax and the abdomen, and I'm going to show you a bit more about that in detail in a few minutes. So how can you distinguish an ant from another insect? How can you tell one species of ant from another? Well, ants share some important characteristics that all insects possess. So every insect, when you're trying to identify them specifically, it's helpful to know how to be able to name the body parts. So all insects have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And like other insects, ants also have an exoskeleton, which is an external covering that provides a protective casing around the body, which serves as a point of attachment for the muscles. Thinking about this in contrast with the human body, our skeletons are within us and our muscles attached to them internally, as do other vertebrates as well. So if you were to get really close up and personal with a fire ant, this is what you would see face to face. The image on the left is a close-up of the fire ant's head, and you can see that it has 2 mandibles with 4 teeth on each one. And unlike humans, whose brains are located in their heads, ants have little clumps of nerves in each of their region of their body that help control the activities in that area. Some ants are nearly blind, so rather than seeing, the ants use their antennae to smell their food and to sense their surroundings. And they use these two to communicate with other ants. So you can see on the right-hand side, they have an elbowed antennae. And then back to their mouth parts, they have chewing mouth parts that they use to break food into particles that are sizes that they can easily carry back to their nest. However, you might think they look fierce enough to be able to chew this food up and eat it. They only sip liquids from the food particles, so that's something important to note as well. So then we get on from the head. The next part of the body of an ant is a thorax, and most ants do not have wings. However, mature ant colonies produce winged males and females, and that's pictured there on the right, and their wings are attached to the thorax part of their body. These winged females and males are called reproductives, and they will fly from nest to nest or begin their own nest elsewhere. So if you notice that your fire ant mound might have winged ants in it, it's probably a sign that it's a well-established colony and it could begin to spread because it has these more mature reproductives in it. Along with wings being attached to the thorax, that is also where an insect's legs are attached, and all insects have 3 pairs of legs in the center of the body. So I talked about this tiny little 2 node in between the abdomen and the thorax. So the abdomen is the 3rd part of the body, and as I mentioned before, on a fire ant, it's a darker brown-red color than the rest of the body. And it's called the abdomen. It contains the digestive organs and the stinger, but not all species of ants have a stinger. And the thorax and the abdomen are connected by a waist-like extension called the petiole. So it's kind of a thin waist-like extension. So petioles can have either 1 or 2 swellings or nodes. So on the left-hand side, that's not a fire ant, that has 1 node, but our fire ant friends have 2 nodes. So if you were up close enough to determine if the ant that you're looking at has 1 or 2 nodes, you would be able to determine whether or not it was a fire ant. So that's a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how to identify a fire ant if you really were up close and personal. So where are they living? Well, fire ants are native of southern Brazil, and they currently inhabit 11 of the southern states, as well as isolated areas in New Mexico and California. Fire ants have a much greater impact on the ornamental plant, sod, and landscaping industries because of the problems associated with shipping potentially infested plant material or soil into uninfested areas of the state. The mounds discovered in previously uninfested areas of North Carolina are frequently traced back to landscaping performed at commercial and residential developments. So it really is a problem that the landscaping industry is trying to address and deal with. So if you look closer at a map of North Carolina, imported fire ants can be found in at least 75 of our 100 counties, including a few isolated areas in the western part of North Carolina. The areas shown in red on the map here are currently under quarantine by the USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture, and also the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Service. They're under quarantine to work to regulate the movement of the certain items that might carry ant infestations to other uninfested parts of the state and the country. So it's really important if you're in a quarantined area to be careful about what you're moving across county lines and across state lines to be sure that you're not contaminating uninfested areas or non-quarantine areas of the state and the country. So fire ants in established turf grass are considered nuisance pests due to the formed mounds that they create. And you can see here in some of the pictures, you might recognize something like this in your yard. If you play ball on a field or on a golf course, you might notice this, and it is a nuisance. They can also damage equipment. They're very unsightly. And additionally, when they're encountered by humans, pets, livestock, and other animals, their stings can cause serious pain and injury. So for the general public, 2 aspects of red imported fire ant infestations are particularly annoying is the unsightly mounds that they form in our lawns and yards and the painful stings that you can receive when the mounds are disturbed. So you do want to try to address this. And here is fire ant mounds can vary in size and are a good indicator of the size of the colony. So the one that's on the right-hand side, it's about 2 feet around in diameter and approximately 18 inches high. That can contain as many as 100,000 workers, several hundred winged adults, and a queen. So that's a fairly established fire ant colony, and you probably would want to really take some measures to try to address that in your landscape. Fire ants also build mounds around edges of sidewalks and slabs. They'll sneak into a crack that might be in pavement or concrete or asphalt. So they're pretty resilient in where they can build their homes. So how do we control fire ants if we have them in our landscape? It's really important to try to take an integrated pest management approach, and we're going to discuss some of the suggested cultural and chemical control methods. I like to prefer and suggest cultural practices first because when you're using a chemical product that can treat an insect that's a pesticide that's an insecticide, they have the potential to not only damage and destroy the pest, in this case the fire ant, but they also may prove to destroy some of your beneficial insects that might be in your landscape that you might want for pollinator benefits or to attract other types of wildlife to your lawn or your yard. So really be careful in how much you apply and what you are applying, and know what the possible side effects could be when trying to attract other beneficials to your yard. So as with other insect pests, fire ants spend a great deal of their time searching for food. And that foraging activity can bring them inside your buildings, and you can reduce ant foraging around your buildings by eliminating available food sources in these areas. So fire ants prefer oily and greasy food, so eliminating that from your surroundings is important. Outdoor trash cans around schools, parks, outside of your garage or outside of your house and other buildings should be emptied frequently during the day. Avoid leaving trash in them overnight, and keep the area around the trash can clean. We are in getting into the peak of tourist season, so any outside trash cans that we may have in public areas or even around our properties may fill up rather quickly, so it's really good to be vigilant about managing your trash area if you want to prevent fire ants from foraging for food around your property. Another cultural practice that you can put into place to keep them out of your house or further away from your landscape is to keep shrubs pruned away from the building so that the ants can't use them as a bridge to assist in their foraging efforts. Also, inspecting and observing the items that you're bringing into your landscape is a very good practice. Because, as I mentioned, fire ants can spread in new landscape materials such as shrubs, sod, wheat, and pine straw. When you're purchasing these items, check them very carefully, or if you're having them installed, be sure to do an inspection to make sure that they are not infested ahead of time with fire ants. So if you're doing your own landscaping, also if you notice if something's infested when you start to handle or plant or put down mulch, you could get stung by handling them because you weren't aware that they were in those products. And if you purchase something and you notice that it's infected or infested with fire ants, contact your supplier immediately so that they can be aware that they may have a problem with some of the products that they have. So what do you do if you already have fire ants? Well, one common cultural method control is hot water drench. Texas A&M University Extension has done an extensive amount of research on fire ant control and management, and they suggest drenching the mounds with a large volume of hot water. So they recommend greater than 2 gallons over 90 degrees for severe mechanical disruption. And this can significantly reduce your fire ant activity. However, when you do this, it can force satellite mounds to form within a few feet of the original mound within a few days. So this method can be useful, but it can be temporary. So you need to be fairly vigilant when you are using a hot water drench on your fire ant mounds. Also, it's a good idea to use this where in an area where chemical control is not really ideal because it might be highly used by the public, or you need to use it in a certain amount of time that you don't have enough time to use a chemical application. But do be careful when you are attempting this method using really hot water and pouring it. You need to practice safety because the hot water can cause severe burns. And the reason they recommend greater than 2 gallons is to be sure that that hot water will reach down into the colony deep enough to kill the queen, and that will help really destroy the fire ant mound. Many people also try to dig up the mounds to move them or dump them onto another mound. This can be somewhat effective, but it's not always the best practice. Most people do this in thinking that the ants are territorial and that if they put ants from one colony into another, that they will infight and destroy each other, but that's not the case. They're very tolerant of ants from neighboring mounds. So you can, in a quick fix, attempt to shovel one mound to another area, but it really is not going to have them kill each other, as you may have heard as a suggested cultural practice. Barriers for fire ants that they will not cross can be a temporary effective solution in keeping ants out of sensitive areas, such as your sheds, your garages, from close to benches or patio furniture. So there are non-chemical barriers such as talcum powder, and there's a Teflon-like tape or spray product that can be used on vertical surfaces, and that prevents them from being able to climb up on those surfaces. One thing to note with this, while it is effective in very humid or wet conditions, which we can experience here in Dare County, they often lose their slipperiness quite quickly. There is a product called Tanglefoot, which is a petroleum-based sticky material, and that's available as a gel or an aerosol. And again, it's effective, but it's temporary because as things get dusty or if the wind blows and things begin to stick into the surface of that, it becomes less effective. So just be aware of that, and you may need to repeat your applications on a fairly regular basis. So there are some home remedies that I came across, and research was done again by Texas A&M to determine if they're effective or not. The items listed on the right, such as grits into a fire ant mound or molasses, asparagine, or club soda, have not been proven to work. But if you have someone in your family who has said, oh yeah, this is a great idea, you can try it. There's no risk in trying it, but they have really not found them to be effective methods of controlling fire ants in your yard. You may also hear individuals suggest pouring gasoline, chlorine, ammonia, or diesel fuel onto a fire ant mound, and this is definitely not recommended as it can contaminate the soil and the groundwater. And some of these are accelerants. So if we are at the high risk of fire or wildfire in our surrounding areas, you are pouring an accelerant into your yard, and it creates for a very dangerous situation. So the items on the right or on the left you could experiment with, but please do not use the chlorine, gasoline, ammonia, or diesel fuel on fire ant mounds, because you not only contaminate the soil and groundwater, but you put your home and landscape at a risk of fire. So if you need to resort to chemical treatment, we're going to cover 3 types of control that can prove to be effective, particularly when paired with good cultural practices. There is a soil drench. This is fast acting, and it's best applied in high traffic areas or turf grass stands where there is low tolerance for fire ant activity. So if you have a ball field, or if you use your yard a lot for picnics or entertaining, you do not want to have fire ant mounds in that area, because whoever is using that field will have a good chance of disturbing the mound and then getting a fire ant attack. You do have to apply this with considerable volume, again, greater than 2 gallons of water to each mound, to be sure that you are reaching the queen in the nest. Otherwise, the colony will survive. If you go with the soil drench method, it's best to treat it in the mid-morning when the ants are closest to the surface, and you should not physically disturb the mound before or after your application. Another chemical treatment is powder granules, and you can apply these to the top of the mound, followed with a significant irrigation. And again, you want to be sure that that active ingredient gets all the way down into the nest to reach the queen. And then there are also baits, which are slower acting compared to the mound drenches and the powder granules. But depending on the active ingredient, these products can work in about 3 to 14 days. Just a note, if you are using baits, do not place them on top of the mound, because the foraging ants exit the nest along the outside of the base. So you want to place the product within a 2-foot radius around the mound. And baits function as attractant to fire ants, so the product must be fresh. So really check the shelf life if you're purchasing this, and you want to keep the product dry and apply it on a very dry time of the day. Do not apply it to wet grass or if there's a risk of rainfall. And also they absorb odors, so if you're storing it, be sure you keep it in a sealed tight container so that it does not absorb odors from other things in the surrounding area. One thing to note, many of these products are not labeled for edible plants, so make sure to read the label before you place them near a home vegetable garden. And I will share again, always read the label anytime you're using a chemical, because you want to be sure that you're using it correctly. North Carolina State Extension has created this very helpful fire ant decision tool, which I will post on our website along with this video recording. And this gives you a good indicator of how you should go about treating your fire ants if you choose to go the route with chemical fire ant management. And so if you have lots of mounds to treat or not many, and it walks you through the different options and then what the best solution of chemical control would be. Again, I always suggest partnering your chemical control with your cultural practices to have the most effective management. And then, as I mentioned, regardless of the product or the method you are using, if it obtains a chemical, always follow the label when you're applying fire ant insecticide. Some products are not approved for use in home lawns or around food if you may be growing your own vegetables and produce. Again, I suggest you try cultural practices first before you would go with the chemical route. And that's everything I have for you today on managing fire ants in your lawn and landscape. I will have this recording shared on our website along with some of our other resources. If you want to connect with the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Dare County, our website is dare.ces.ncsu.edu, and our phone number is 252-473-4290. So again, if you have a question today about fire ants, please give us a call and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Also, our wonderful Extension Master Gardener volunteers have times where they will be in the office at the Ask a Master Gardener table. They will be on June 14th in Manio on 517 Budley Street. You can stop in with a gardening or landscape question between 9 and 11 and speak with the Master Gardener. They also are at the Outer Banks Arboretum every Wednesday between 9 and 11, so you can visit them there as well. And then here's a list of some of the resources I used to put together today's presentation. I will share these on the website as well. Thanks again for joining us for Advice to Grow By, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.